Queen Cleopatra was an Egyptian queen. In 48 BC, she was exiled by her brother and husband, Ptolemy, 14. Later that year, Julius Caesar came to Alexandria to ensure the loyalty of Egypt to the Roman Empire. One night, when Caesar was meeting with his generals in the Egyptian palace, a guard entered to report that a Greek merchant was at the door. He had brought a large and valuable gift for the Roman leader. Caesar was in a mood of fun, so he gave permission to enter. The man came in carrying a large rolled-up carpet. He undid the rope, and with a snap of his wrists, he unfurled it. Cleopatra, who had been hidden inside, rose up half-clothed before Caesar and his guests. She looked as beautiful as a goddess rising from the sea. Cleopatra was only 24 at that time. She was gorgeous and had a delightful voice. Caesar had had numerous mistresses before to divert him from the challenges of the campaign. But he always returned to what excited him the most: political intrigue, the challenges of warfare, and the Roman theater. But the charm of Cleopatra was different. One night she would tell him how together they could revive the glory of Alexander the Great and rule the world like gods. The next she would entertain him dressed as the goddess Isis. Life of Caesar with her was a constant game, as challenging as warfare. For the moment, Caesar will feel secure with Cleopatra, and then she would suddenly turn cold or angry. Caesar would have to find a way to regain her favor. Caesar was so anxious to win her back that he fought and defeated all rivals of Cleopatra. Cleopatra's mastery of seduction allowed her to maintain her position as Queen of Egypt. She secured alliances with the most powerful men of her time. Her story serves as a timeless example of the art of seduction. She used the power of charm, wit, and cunning for achieving her goal. Today, in this video, I'm going to share the seduction tips from the book The Art of Seduction, written by the author Robert Greene. By watching this video, you'll learn to identify the desire of people and use it for your advantage. You will also learn to master the art of flattery and charm. I will share the stories of people and how they used seduction process to captivate their targets. The book has mentioned the 3 phases of seduction. In today's video, I will tell you the 8 tips of Phase 1, which explains how you can seduce people and finally bring them in your control. Phase 1 is about stirring interest and desire. Generally, people are busy with their own lives and filled with their own worries. So, the first goal is to pull them out of their world and slowly get them to think about you. So how can you do this? Let me share you the 8 tactics that you can use to bring attention of your target on you. Number 1, choose the right victim. In 1770s Paris, the young Vicomte de Valmont was a well-known womanizer. After seducing many young and rich women in Paris, he got bored. So one day, he decided to leave the Paris and visit his aunt's house. There, in his aunt's house, he met a young and beautiful woman, Présidente. She was only 22 and her husband was temporarily out of the village. She was local girl and her choice of clothing was terrible. Unlike rich women in Paris, her conversations were dull and she didn't seem to realize how attractive she was. Because of the hot weather, she wore a simple linen dress that showed off her figure. A thin piece of muslin covered her chest, making Valmont imagine more than he could see. Her slightly messy hair made him think of intimate moments in the bedroom. Valmont wanted to see how the Présidente felt about him, so one day he planned to walk with her and his aunt. While walking, they came to a small ditch, so he picked up his aunt and carried her over. Présidente laughed. Then, when it was her turn, Valmont purposely lifted her a bit awkwardly so she had to hold on to him. In that moment, he felt her heart beating faster and saw her blush. This made him realize she might be interested in him. Valmont's aunt suggested otherwise. She said Présidente was afraid. But deep down, Valmont in that moment knew Présidente was also interested in him. He knew the challenge could be met and seduction can proceed. In this story, Valmont didn't decide to seduce Présidente because she was married to a rich person, stylishly dressed, or desired by other men. He chooses her because, in her natural way of being, Valmont was already attracted by Présidente. She also had other traits that make her the perfect victim. She was bored, naive, and unable to see through the tricks of Valmont. So when you are choosing the target to seduce, you should watch how your victim responds to you. Pay greater attention to the responses such as a blush, an involuntary mirroring of some gesture of yours, an unusual shyness, or perhaps a flash of anger. The other way to identify your target is knowing how you feel when you are with them. Maybe they make you feel uncomfortable, remind you of a childhood dream, or represent something forbidden that excites you. When you become more lively, more energetic around someone, it's a signal that should help you to identify your victim. Number 2, create a false sense of security and approach your target indirectly. To understand this, let me tell you a story of a member of French royal family from 17th century whose name was La Grande Mademoiselle. One day, Grande Mademoiselle met a very interesting man, the Marquis Antonin Peguilin, who later became the Duc de Lauzun. He was a brave soldier and had a sharp sense of humor. Despite not being very tall or good-looking, his bold personality and military achievements made him attractive to many women. The Grande Mademoiselle had noticed him before, but it wasn't until 1669 that they actually talked. They met again a few days later, and this time they talked more. They discussed things like her favorite playwright, Corneille, and bravery. After that, they started seeing each other more often and became friends. As the time passed by, Mademoiselle understood that she has feelings for Lauzun and decided to be more direct. She talked to Lauzun about marriage and the proposals she was still getting. She hoped this would make him express his feelings, maybe even show some jealousy. But Lauzun didn't seem to get the hint. Instead, he questioned why she was thinking about marriage when she seemed happy already. He also avoided talking about his own personal feelings. Then, a few months later, the king suggested that the Grande Mademoiselle marry his brother, who had just become a widower. She was disgusted by the idea because it seemed like the brother was only interested in her money. When she asked Lauzun what he thought, he said they should obey the king's wish. This upset her, and Lauzun stopped visiting her, as if their friendship wasn't proper anymore. This made the Grande Mademoiselle really mad. She told the king she wouldn't marry his brother. Then she met with Lauzun and wrote a name on a piece of paper, the name of the man she wanted to marry all along. She told Lauzun to read it the next morning. When he saw that she had written his name, he thought she was joking, but she was serious. A few weeks later, everyone was left in shock. Lauzun and the Grande Mademoiselle were engaged to be married. The lesson from the story is, you should not rush things. Lauzun didn't rush things. Instead, he took his time. He acted like her most loyal friend, talking to her about things she liked, like poetry, history, and war. Slow and indirect approach helps your target to feel comfortable and build the trust. Once they start to trust you, they will share their personal secrets. They become vulnerable, and you can start suggesting something more than just friendship. Eventually, your target will fall in your trap. Number 3, send mixed signals to your victim. During a war between Prussia and France, a young prince named Auguste was captured by Napoleon. Instead of imprisoning him, Napoleon allowed him to move freely within French territory, but kept an eye on him using spies. Auguste enjoyed having fun, so he spent his time traveling from place to place, seducing young girls along the way. One day, he decided to visit Switzerland, where he met a woman named Madame Récamier. She was known for her beauty and had a very innocent and angelic face. During dinner that night, the prince observed Madame Récamier closely. She didn't talk much and often kept her eyes down, but sometimes she looked up at him. After dinner, everyone gathered in a room and Madame Récamier started playing and singing a love song. Suddenly she seemed different. She looked mischievous as she glanced at the prince. Her beautiful voice and flirty looks made him feel confused but excited. In the following days, the prince and Madame Récamier spent time together. They spent time by going on walks, rowing on the lake, and dancing. They talked a lot, but the prince couldn't figure out Madame Récamier's feelings. Sometimes she seemed spiritual and noble, and other times she flirted with him. After 2 weeks, the prince proposed to Madame Récamier. He promised to convert to her religion, and she said she would divorce her older husband. She also agreed to live with him in Prussia. The prince rushed to Prussia to get his family's approval, while Madame Récamier went back to Paris for legal arrangements. The prince sent her lots of love letters and waited anxiously. Finally, he received a letter from her, but it was not what Prince expected. Madame Récamier had changed her mind. She was not coming back. Months later, Madame Récamier sent the prince a famous painting of herself lying on a sofa. Prince gazed at it for hours, trying to solve the mystery in her eyes. Like many others before him, Prince was left behind as an admirer of charm and beauty of Madame Récamier. She was something he tried hard to understand, but he never figured her out properly. The tips from this story is that to seduce someone effectively, you have to fill your victim's mind with thoughts of you. Your innocence, beauty, or charm might catch their eye, but to make them truly obsessed, you have to seem mysterious and complex. You should be like a puzzle they can't solve easily. Like Madame Récamier always kept her men at a certain distance, so they could never figure her out. She sent mixed signals. At times she was noble and flirtatious the other time. So, if you appear like a puzzle that can bring great pleasure if solved, your victim gets attracted more and more towards you. Number 4. Appear to be an object of desire. Paul Ray, who lived in Rome, met a young Russian girl named Lou von Salome at a gathering hosted by an older woman. They had a deep conversation that lasted late into the night. Lou's ideas about God and morality fascinated Paul, but her flirtatious eyes confused him. They spent several days together, taking long walks around the city. One day, Lou surprised Paul by suggesting that they, along with their mutual friend Friedrich Nietzsche, should travel together and even live together. Paul, who didn't agree at first, wrote to Nietzsche, urging him to come to Rome. When Nietzsche arrived, Paul became jealous because it seemed like Nietzsche was interested in Lou. But Paul was determined to win Lou's affection for himself and didn't want to share her with Nietzsche. So Paul suggested Lou for traveling with her and her mother to Germany. But Nietzsche also decided to join them on their journey to Paul's home in Prussia. During the trip, Nietzsche and Lou went for a walk alone, which made Paul even more anxious. When they returned, Paul Ray sensed that something had happened between Lou and Nietzsche. He felt angry and worried that he was losing her. The group parted ways, with Lou's mother going back to Russia, Nietzsche returning to his summer place, and Paul and Lou staying together at Paul's home. However, Lou didn't stay long with Paul. She accepted Nietzsche's invitation to visit him alone, which made Paul even more upset. He missed her and became even more determined to win her over. When Lou came back, Paul expressed his bitterness, criticizing Nietzsche and questioning his intentions toward Lou. But Lou took Nietzsche's side, leaving Paul feeling hopeless. However, a few days later, Lou surprised Paul by deciding she wanted to live with him, and only him. They moved to Berlin together, but Paul soon realized that Lou was still attracting attention from other men. Paul felt like he was competing for her affection again. Eventually, he couldn't take it anymore and left Lou, ending his own life. Creating the illusion that you are desired by others makes you more attractive. Lou in this story formed a triangle. She introduced another person who desired her. This made Paul go mad, and he wanted to win Lou more than ever. The trick from this story is that you should make your target aware of their competition. Surround yourself with admirers and share stories of your past successes. This will make you more attractive, and you can win over your target victim. Number 5. Create a need. Stir anxiety and discontent in your target. There lived a boy named David Herbert Lawrence. Unlike other boys of his age, he didn't enjoy typical activities like sports. Instead, David preferred spending his time reading books and being with girls. Among the girls, he had a special bond with Jessie. They often studied together, and as time passed, Jessie and David grew even closer. One day, during their usual study time, Lawrence behaved strangely. He told Jessie that they were becoming too close. He suggested that they should remain friends but spend less time together. Jessie felt confused and upset by this unexpected shift in their relationship. She couldn't understand why Lawrence wanted to pull away after being so close before. After some time, Lawrence began to criticize Jessie more often, saying she wasn't affectionate enough and wouldn't be a good wife. They started to spend less time than before. Lawrence got a teaching job in London and moved in there. However, he continued to write her letters, mentioning other girls he was interested in. In time, Lawrence made up his mind to marry Jessie but requested her to keep it secret for some time. He and Jessie struck an agreement to become lovers. Unfortunately, their relationship fell into a familiar pattern of arguments, breakups, and Lawrence announcing engagement to another person. Jessie felt trapped, and she finally made the tough decision to end things with Lawrence. Many women and men were seduced by Lawrence despite his unpleasant side. He often started relationships as friendships, sharing deep conversations and forming spiritual connections. But then, he would suddenly become critical, hitting them with accurate yet hurtful remarks. This left them feeling confused and anxious, doubting themselves. Lawrence's tactic was to exploit people's underlying insecurities and defensiveness, making them aware of their weaknesses. While Lawrence used a direct approach, it's often more effective to indirectly stir up feelings of inadequacy and uncertainty. By hinting at comparisons or suggesting their lives are not as grand as they imagined, you can create inner turmoil and anxiety in your victims. This sets the stage for seduction, as desire grows from a sense of lack and need. Number 6. Master the art of insinuation. One evening in the 1770s, a young man went to the Paris Opera to meet his lover, the Countess de T. They had been fighting, and he was eager to see her again. When he arrived, the Countess wasn't in her box, but her friend Madame de T from a nearby box invited the young man to join her. She said it was a lucky day that they bumped into each other. She also asked him to keep her company on a trip. Though confused, he agreed. During the journey, Madame suggested to look out the window at the passing scenery. So he leaned over toward her to see, but suddenly carriage jolted and she grabbed his hand and fell into his arms. After a brief moment, she pulled away suddenly. There was an awkward silence, and then she asked if he was trying to make her feel foolish. Young man protested it, saying it was just an accident, and assured her he would behave properly. Upon arrival, Madame led young man into a pavilion. It was dark inside, but the young man could tell it was a spot for secret meetings. They went in and sat down on a sofa, and suddenly he found himself embracing her. Madame initially resisted, but then she gave up. As they returned back from the pavilion, Madame mentioned many times about the monsieur's apartment. This made young man curious, and he insisted to take him there. Madame took him there as well. It was a special place for fun. There were mirrors, paintings that looked like a forest, even a dark cave, and a statue of Cupid with flowers. Feeling the atmosphere, the young man eagerly continued what he had begun in the pavilion. They lost the track of the time in these moments until a servant rushed in. As young man left, Madame bid him farewell. She reminded the pleasures they had shared. Young man was confused. On his journey home, he was completely torn between doubts and the memories of pleasure. Madame de T is a character in a story called No Tomorrow by Vivant Denon. She uses insinuation to seduce the young man, making him feel like he's the one in control when in reality, she's the mastermind behind it all. For example, she sets up situations to make him think he's initiating things, like when she invited him closer in the carriage. Then, she plants ideas in his mind to confuse and manipulate him, like suggesting his lover is unfaithful. She even makes him feel guilty for being angry about it. By creating ambiguity and doubt, she keeps him hooked and under her control. In seduction, it's crucial to use insinuation to plant seeds of desire and doubt in your target's mind. A subtle touch, a meaningful glance, or a suggestive comment can stir up feelings that will linger long after you're gone. By indirectly influencing their thoughts and emotions, you can lead them into your trap without them even realizing it. Number 7. Enter the spirit of your target. Cindy Adams was a journalist who wasn't well known at the time. Despite her initial days in journalism, she landed a big achievement by getting an exclusive interview with President Sukarno of Indonesia. Sukarno had agreed to the interview with an amateur journalist despite his famous status as a president. Adams approached the interview with humor and confidence, not feeling intimidated by Sukarno's status. Surprisingly, Sukarno warmed up to her, and the interview went longer than planned. He even gave her gifts afterward and kept in touch when she returned to New York. Later, he suggested they work together on his autobiography. Adams was puzzled by Sukarno's interest, knowing he was known for being flirtatious. However, she accepted the offer. When she returned to Indonesia for interviews, she maintained her bold attitude. Surprisingly, Sukarno seemed influenced by her, granting her requests and praising her intelligence. Despite Sukarno's advances, Adams made it clear she was committed to her marriage. Sukarno respected her boundaries. As they continued the interviews, their relationship evolved, with Sukarno even dyeing his hair to match hers. After the autobiography was released, it improved Sukarno's image in Indonesia during a time of political turmoil. Despite initial doubts, Adams proved to be the perfect collaborator for Sukarno's autobiography. In this story, who was captivating whom? It was Sukarno who was captivating Adams, and his approach followed a classic pattern. First, he chose the right target. He chose Adams, who had little journalism experience, and sent mixed signals, making her doubt his intentions. By mirroring her behavior and making her feel in control, he gradually gained influence over her emotions without her realizing it. Sukarno's clever actions made Adams feel comfortable with him, so she started to see things his way without even realizing it. Sukarno used the tactic of entering into someone's spirit. This is a tactic which gives your victims the feeling that they are seducing you. When you are imitating them, you are entering their spirit. Slowly, you can change the dynamics as they become vulnerable. Once your victim is vulnerable, you can influence and control them. This is one of the devilish tactics among all the tactics. Number 8. Create temptation on your target. Sometime in the 1880s, there was a gentleman named Don Juan de Todelas in Madrid. He had an affair with a young woman called Cristeta Moreruela. She was a showgirl in a second-rate theater. Don Juan was an excellent seducer. He made up a story about business troubles, gained her sympathy, and in a tender moment took advantage of her weakness. After some days, he left Cristeta and left for Paris. 3 years after this, one day when he was in a park at Madrid, he saw a young, beautiful woman who was dressed elegantly. Don Juan was left stunned when he knew it was the same woman. She looked more beautiful than ever. She now had a small child. A lot of questions started flowing through the mind of Don Juan. Could the boy possibly be his? If not, she must have married almost immediately after their affair. Did she marry a wealthy person? Who could her husband be? Don Juan also started questioning himself. Why had he given her up so easily? Don Juan realized that he had to win back her, even if she is married, so he began to visit the park every day. He saw her a few more times. Their eyes met, but she pretended not to notice him. One day he followed her nursemaid, then talked to her and asked about her mistress's husband. She said the husband, Señor Martinez, was away on a long business trip. She also told him where Cristeta lived now. Don Juan gave her a note to pass to her mistress, asking to meet again. After numerous notes, Cristeta finally agreed to meet Don Juan. He got ready for the meeting carefully, but when he saw her coming, wearing her beautiful clothes, his feelings and desires overwhelmed him. He told her she could only be with him, not another man. Cristeta didn't like this. Her current situation made it impossible for them to meet again. He begged to see her again, but she left without agreeing. He sent her more letters while trying hard to understand. Who was this Señor Martinez? Why did he marry a performer like Cristeta? How could he win Cristeta away from him? For several nights, Don Juan couldn't sleep well because he kept thinking about Cristeta. He had nightmares about hurting her husband and ending up alone. It became too overwhelming, so he decided to leave town. He sent her a goodbye letter, but to his surprise, she replied, saying she wanted to meet him and had something important to say. He was too weak to resist, so he agreed to meet her on a bridge at night as she requested. When they met again, Cristeta revealed that she was not married and had no child. Months after he had left her, she had realized that she had been the victim of a consummate seducer. She still loved Don Juan and was determined to turn the tables. She bought expensive clothes and asked neighbor's cousin to play the child's nursemaid, and rented a coach, all to create an elaborate fantasy that existed only in his mind. She knew that being unable to have her would make him want her more than ever. Cristeta and Don Juan are characters in a story called Sweet and Savory, written by Jacinto Octavio Picon. In the story, Cristeta decides to get revenge and win back Don Juan after he abandons her. She knows Don Juan is attracted to what he can't have, so she makes herself seem unattainable to him. This makes him want her even more. Cristeta uses this strategy to tempt Don Juan back to her. Temptation works in two ways. First, you flirt and tease to create desire, and then you set up barriers to make yourself seem unattainable, which increases the desire even more. This is it in this video. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe the channel. See you soon in the next video.